This is an Odyssey original.
This is the War in Ukraine Daily. I'm Charles Feldman.
And I'm Mike Simpson from the KNX Odyssey Studios in Los Angeles. The Ukrainian city of Mariupol continues to represent the worst horrors of Russia's invasion, bloody urban combats, repeated targeting by the Russian military, the bombardment. There's thought to be thousands of civilians killed there. We'll talk with one woman who made it out. The Biden administration warning businesses be on the lookout for Russian cyber attacks. If those do come in and hit us hard, could it spark a military response?
More and more Ukrainian refugees and even some Russians are showing up at the U.S Mexican border with the intention of making it into the United States. We'll take a closer look at how officials are handling these complex new migrant patterns. But we start with an escape from Mariupol. Maria and her teenage brother escaped that port city near Ukraine's eastern border with Russia earlier this month, which has since been under heavy Russian attack. Her parents stayed behind to help out in any way they can before also leaving recently. Maria is with us now. Thank you for talking and taking the time to talk with us. What part of Ukraine are you in now?
I'm on the west part of Ukraine. It's for now the safest place in Ukraine.
So near Lviv, something like that?
Not Lviv, Zakarpatska Oblast, or Zakarpatska region.
Okay, so a safer place relative to where you were coming from. What was it like for you and the brother to make that journey? And then your parents, as we said, they recently were able to get out?
Yeah, it was a really hard journey for us, for me and my younger brother. We escaped on the 3rd of March. It was the third day of total blockade. And for us, it was really terrifying what was going on in Mariupol, just constant bombing and no light, no gas, no water. And, you're just thinking in this situation how to survive. And that's all thoughts that you have in mind, how to survive. And for me, it was really a disaster. And I couldn't eat, I couldn't drink, and I understood that I just will die. And that's why I decided to escape. And I escaped, and I was on the road for 48 hours, and with stops, but still it was really hard.
Maria, tell me a little bit about you
Yeah.
and your family. You and your brother. You mentioned your younger brother. How old are you? How
Yeah.
old is your brother?
I'm 28 and my brother is 16.
Before the war, so not that long ago, what did all of you folks do in Ukraine? What was your life like before this happened?
Oh, we just lived our happy life. What we were doing, we were working, uh, just building our lives like dreams. I lived in Kiev for some time, and on the 23rd of March, I visited Mariupol, visited my parents, relatives, friends, and for example, we walked in a park, and Mariupol actually was an amazing city because they just destroyed everything there. We had so many beautiful parks, uh, seashore, and even beautiful industrial landscapes. They were so close to heart, and for now, everything is destroyed.
What is it like to think about it now, to know what's happened now to a place that was so beautiful?
I think I just can't even for now imagine it. I see photos, but I don't believe them. I I, I can't. And even today, our neighbors which escaped today, they sent us a video of our home, and we lived in a high-rise building, um, and it burned out. All
The entire building is burnt out.
the entire building, the entire building with. I don't have home anymore, actually.
And your parents, same thing?
Yes, yes, it was our flat where we lived.
Do
So
you,
today I became homeless.
Maria, do you and your family, I mean, this is all happening obviously so quickly,
Yeah.
but you must be starting to think, I would imagine, what your future is going to be like. Do you have a sense of where you go from here, what you do from here?
Um, I just can't even imagine what to do, um, and what my parents will do. When you're escaping from that hell, your horizon of planning, it is very small. For a first week, you can plan just for, I don't know, 2 hours, one day. That's all you can plan. That's all time for what you can plan anything. One day, not more. And now I feel that I can plan, for example, for a week, but not further, because it is very it is everything is very frustrating. And I'm thinking about maybe maybe go to Europe, but then I see what's going on in Ukraine, and I understand that if Ukraine won't stand, it will happen to Europe. And then where I should go, I don't know. It's uh, it's very frustrating and very terrifying, even because for now I understand that even Europe won't be safe enough if I want to escape from Russia aggression.
You
Because Europe now taking Russians, like we're calling them McDonald's refugee, uh, and so they will come to rescue them, guys. That's a disaster, I think.
we mentioned that your parents were able to get out of the city. Have you?
Yeah.
Are they with you, or are you still trying to get to them? Or are they trying to get to you? And you must have been so worried on the outside when they were still there. I can't even imagine.
Yeah, I haven't heard from them more than a week, and I was so nervous. I just couldn't even sleep. I just didn't know if they're alive or they are dead or what happened. And that's a really huge relief that they're alive. And I'm now helping them to find places to stay on the road, because they are really exhausted. They are really tired, exhausted, and in a shock. You know, my father, when he escaped for at first day, they called me and he told me that he will return to Mariupol in a few days.
Hmm.
It was a shock
Maria,
for him.
what are your thoughts about Russians? Do you distinguish between the Russian government and the Russian people, or do you have a feeling that is sort of a blanket feeling now about Russia and Russians?
There is no distinguish. There is no really. I know Russians. I have relatives. I have Russian relatives, and they're totally zombied by their government. They're totally zombied.
Have you
You
talked?
know,
Have you,
they're
Maria? Have you talked or tried to talk with your relatives in Russia? Or what do they tell you if you
of
have?
course, of course. I talked to them. I told them, guys, there are missile under my window in my yard. Come on, come and tell something. Do something at least. I don't know. You're my relatives. How how can you not doing anything? And you know what they told me? Just stay home. Just stay home and don't go. They will destroy just military objects. Guys, I'm not a military object. Come on. But I have a piece of muscle in my flat. They watching Russian TV and just try for one at once try to watch it. That's a real hell. They are just there is no a word of truth. And when I talked to my relatives, I told them, hey, they're killing us. They erased Mariupol from the earth totally, 80% destroyed, and they're still just in the silence.
You said zombies to the propaganda on TV. Maria, thank you for talking to us. Maria there and her teenage brother got out of the port city of Mariupol. Her parents, they were able to get out. They are on the way. She's trying to find them places to stay. And our hearts go out to you and the family, and we're so sorry about you losing your home. And again, thank you for speaking to us. President Biden warning companies watch out for cyber attacks. They're going to come in from Russia. He says it'd be a form of retaliation against the U.S. for sanctions, other actions taken against Russia since the war started.
Cyber attacks originating from Russia wouldn't be something new, but would an escalation of these attacks by Russian intelligence or Russian organized crime call for a response? Could NATO even get involved? Aaron David Miller is a senior fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace and CNN Global Affairs analyst. With the intensity of the warnings of imminent cyber attacks, do you get the sense that the White House has really good intelligence that these attacks are coming?
First of all, it's good to talk to Mike and Charles, and thanks for having me back. Look, the Biden administration has been incredibly transparent since this crisis began. I mean, for weeks before the invasion, they basically laid out intelligence that was basically pretty unprecedented in terms of its level of detail in an effort to sort of dominate the information space and perhaps, although I think they probably realized this would not be possible, to deter Putin from actually projecting his power into Ukraine. Here's another example of trying to get a jump on the Russian leader to basically brief the American public that, in fact, cyber is not only an option, but I think they're picking up, I know they're picking up signals that Russia is in the quote unquote preparatory stages for the possibility of serious cyber warfare against Ukraine and the United States. Biden would not be alerting the American public, given our dependence. I think I'll change all my passwords on the web and on virtual space. If they didn't have a pretty good indication that something is coming. And I think that's where we are now. And one last point here, Putin has blown through so many norms and standards. So the notion of blowing through another, which wouldn't be a ransomware attack against like the SolarWinds attack in 2020, but would be attack designed to target underwater cables industrial control centers, major infrastructure, the financial industry, any of the media networks whose coverage he doesn't like, is a serious possibility.
Yeah, so then what happens then? Because that's an entirely different thing, right, in terms of escalation and a back and forth that could get started rather than just, hey, he's going to slow down things and mess with them for a day or two, and we can all kind of weather that storm or launch more ransomwares and we deal with that. But if he's knocking out pieces of the internet or critical infrastructure, then we would have to respond, right?
We would. And again, there's so many disturbing rabbit holes down which to go here. A cyber attack, frankly, could be terrifyingly destructive. But Putin has clearly thought about the possibility of deploying biological or chemical weapons in Ukraine, and even although it's still unimaginable to me, it's very real. The possibility of deploying a small tactical nuclear weapon, either as a demonstration effect of what he could do, or an actual use of such a weapon with a low nuclear yield on the battlefield. So the idea of a major attack against the United States, I think, is certainly very real. And yes, we would have to respond. I mean, again, the last time Congress was asked for a formal declaration of war, believe it or not, was 1943, when Roosevelt asked for a declaration of war against Hungary, Bulgaria, and Romania, who were Axis allies. So a major attack against critical infrastructure in this country would in fact be a declaration of economic war, just as, I suspect this is what's really bothering Putin, the economic nuclear bomb that we in the international community have dropped on Russia. He's angry, he's aggrieved, and over time he'll grow more so.
And you mentioned that if the Russians were to launch a cyber attack on the U.S., we would be forced to respond. But can we presume that we're not all? Aren't we doing that already to the Russians in terms of cyber attacks?
Well, I think, well, first of all, there are cyber attacks and there are cyber attacks.
Okay.
And again, I'm not a cyber expert, and I don't play one on radio or television. But there's a difference between discrete, targeted, and focused cyber attacks designed to disrupt Russian military communications, and one that is directed at critical Russian infrastructure. I mean, Russia is already a different country. Vladimir Lenin once said that some weeks contain decades. Well, for the Russian public, the Russia they knew has come to an end. The ruble is worthless. You've got a huge brain drain. Prices are surging, particularly in areas like electronics. Russians are buying up as much surplus as they possibly can. There are no flights going to much of the world as a consequence of our sanctions. Life is going to become harder than it was. So if the Russians choose to force a response from the administration, I suspect we will respond proportionally. And if in fact it is a major threat against critical infrastructure, we will do the same.
Aaron David Miller, Senior Fellow, the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Border officials in both the U.S. and Mexico, they're dealing with a surge of migrants. They're not just coming from Central or South America. They're coming from Ukraine, and even some are coming from Russia.
It's something that was going on even before the war, but the numbers from Ukraine have increased lately. So what are both governments doing to address this issue? With us is Jessica Bolter, Associate Policy Analyst with the U.S. Immigration Policy Program at the Migration Policy Institute. How much of an increase are we seeing in Ukrainians and Russians trying to cross the southern U.S. Mexico border?
We know that we've seen increases in Ukrainians and Russians as well in fiscal year 2021 and the first 5 months of fiscal year 2022, which is October through February. But we don't know how many have yet come in March, which is when we'll likely start to really see the effects of the invasion show up.
Does American law treat someone coming from either Russia now or certainly Ukraine differently than they would having somebody come from, Central America or from Mexico? Is there a distinction between a refugee as opposed to somebody who is crossing the border or wants to cross the border because they want to live in another country, meaning this one?
Right. So anyone who shows up at the US border, in theory, should be able to apply for asylum regardless of their nationality. But because since March 2020, we have had this policy called Title 42 in place as a result of the pandemic, which allows border officials to immediately expel migrants without providing them access to asylum, that has changed. And we've seen in recent weeks that the Border Patrol has started to put in place an exception largely for Ukrainians, and has been allowing them access to the asylum system when they show up at ports of entry along the border, even though they're still not allowing access to asylum for people who are coming from most other countries when they show up at those ports.
Yeah, and in the reports that we are seeing, we've got some people from Central America saying, okay, we don't feel this is fair because, we've been waiting and we need asylum and we need to get into the country, but they're moving Ukrainian people to the front of the line and maybe they're getting some sort of refugee status or something like that. And then also some Russians saying, well, the Ukrainians are getting to go through, but we're not, and I can't go back to Russia because I don't agree with the war, and maybe that's not the thing that'll get you in. But if you really feel like you'd be persecuted if you go back, if you've said things and they have these new laws now, then maybe is that more of a reason that you could get into this country?
Uh, yes, theoretically, maybe it should be, but and there are, I should say, there are humanitarian exceptions made on a case by case basis in terms of migrants who might be particularly vulnerable and then allowed into the U.S. at these ports to seek asylum. But that's certainly not the norm. And I think that the fact that Russians who are fleeing persecution for objecting to the same conflict that the Ukrainians are fleeing, and they still can't ask for asylum, really makes the arbitrariness of this policy in place at the border crystal clear. But at the same time, there are plenty of Central Americans, Nicaraguans, Venezuelans fleeing persecution who also haven't been able to enter at these ports of entry since March 2020.
If someone is coming from Ukraine and they want to come to the U.S. And stay here, why do they have to go through Mexico? Why can't they just fly into New York or Chicago or Los Angeles?
Right. So if someone has a tourist visa already or another type of visa, say a student visa, or if they have a family member sponsoring them for a green card, then they can fly into the US. But it has become much harder for anyone from these countries to get tourist visas or any non-permanent visas because in order to get a tourist visa, they essentially have to prove that they intend to go back to their home country. And that's very difficult for Ukrainians to do at this point. Uh, and so Mexico does not require as extensive a visa process for these individuals. It allows them to fly into Mexico with just uh, by just submitting their passport information and flight information beforehand. So, in the absence of pathways to come into the U.S., many have turned to Mexico instead.
Is there any for Ukrainians, if there are refugees, is there any kind of special dispensation set up right now, or is it just the usual program case by case basis, and you would have to get to Mexico and then come to the border, and that's what we're seeing, and then just plead your case like anybody else?
Right. At the moment, there isn't a special pathway set up. Ukrainians could apply to the U.S. refugee program. They would have to do that from a country abroad, and that process can take years to go through. So that wouldn't be an immediate pathway. So there's essentially no sort of emergency pathway for them to utilize.
Jessica Bolter there at the Migration Policy Institute. Jessica, thanks. This is an Odyssey original. You can find us and others on the Odyssey app, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and on Stitcher.